Hey guys, this is Paulo with Meditation Amsterdam, and in today's video I want to talk about how the more forgiving we are, the less real the world appears to be around us, up to the point where the world seemingly loses all its reality and its separateness from ourselves. So we become unified or non-dual with the world. Now, there's a lot of talk about forgiveness, and there's a lot of talk about how that makes us more compassionate and better and the rest of that good stuff. But there is less talk about how forgiveness is a very potent solvent that dismantles the seeming reality and the seeming separateness of the world. I came up with the topic whilst painting a portrait. It's something that I hadn't done in at least 7 years or thereabouts. She's right here with me, as a matter of fact. And it's not quite finished yet, but I think it's starting to come together. So these are oils, so there it is. It's a black lady. And the reason that this portrait reminded me of forgiveness as a solvent of reality is how very often when we see a painting, we really quickly forget that we're looking at a canvas with paint on it, and our mind immediately starts to make stories about it and interpret things, right? So maybe when you saw this portrait, hopefully, it had a bit of an effect that would make you think in psychological terms, right? So, if you've been to a museum, you look at these paintings, you think, oh, she looks really happy, or oh my God, what a violent scene. And, we immediately start to comment on the content of the painting, the meaning behind it, the mood that it represents, and the rest of it. It's very rare for someone who can comment on the raw use of the materials themselves. Whereas I can tell you that as an artist, that's what I'm mostly looking for. Yes, I'm looking for the depiction of things in that level of the technique, but I'm also looking at brushwork. I'm looking at the use of impastos, directionality, a number of things that are not concerned with the image as such, but really with the materials. And I can tell you, some paintings are so good that you cannot see the material for the image. The image is so entrancing that the mind grabs onto the representation so strongly, so high the quality is, that you cannot see the material. It takes a lot of effort. You may have to come up really close to the point where the mind stops rendering imagery and really can look at pure canvas and paint, or make specific types of effort to not get caught up with the image. And consciousness is doing something very similar to that. It is rendering such an entrancing, high quality representation that we cannot but get lost in the content of it, the images that it's representing. So we get lost in the representation, whereas in fact all we are looking at is pure consciousness. That's the canvas and the paint that we're looking at, but we can't see that because the imagery is so incredibly entrancing. And so just as with painting, there is a way to abstract ourselves away from the content and the meaning and into the pure raw materiality of what we're looking at, or the essential nature of what we're looking at. In the case of consciousness, there is also such a way, and forgiveness plays a very strong role in helping us do that, because there is certain trickery going on. Just as with paintings, there's a lot of trickery going on here, right? That you might look at this and think that there's talent involved, if you look at the brushwork or the way form is turned or whatever. But the way planes are overlapping, the way certain brush strokes are placed strategically in certain places, none of that is by coincidence, right? So if you start to look through the trickery, then you can start to appreciate purely the technique. However, in the case of consciousness, it's quite difficult to do that because there is typically when we are trying to see through the world, or when we are trying to, let's say, get with the with the Vedantic or yogic program that the world is unreal, we can't see it as unreal. We get very, very convinced by the rendering of the world. So part of the reason this is happening, or in fact the reason this is happening, is because the experience is kind of woven, right? So the experience of the world is a number of filaments or strings that are woven together into the fabric of our experience. And it seems to be incredibly real and solid because of that. We can't see the strands. Some strands are easier seen through, but in general, it takes quite a bit of practice and work to be able to see through them. And one of the things that is going to be getting in our way all the way through is memory. We use memory to essentially project the representation of the world. And that memory is difficult to let go of because very, very often it is emotionally laden memory. It's memory that is laced with emotionality, which makes it very strong, very reactive, and very tied to our self-protection mechanism. So we don't want to let go of that memory. And in fact, we want to very actively use it by force of habit to continue rendering the world. Yeah. Now, if we begin to exercise forgiveness, then the emotional charge of the memory in our mind starts to reduce. And it continues reducing progressively to the point where certain memories simply don't feel the need to arise anymore. We don't have the need to project the world based on memory and opinion, and to protect ourselves by doing so. So we can start to navigate the world essentially without an opinion about it, because an opinion is nothing but a defense mechanism based indeed on memory. So as we begin to forgive, there's less of a need to have a mental positionality or an opinion about the way things are. We just see them as they are, or we deal with them as they are. The more that begins to happen, the less there is the need to keep ourselves separate from the world. We can imbibe experience more directly. And the more that begins to happen, the more we start to notice that there is no difference between what we consider to be ourselves and the experiences that we're having, thereby rendering the world not real in the sense that we thought it was real. Yeah, it's still there, it can still be perceived, but it acquires a kind of cinematographic quality to it, which is also very, very peaceful. And there's ironically, although not so much given the explanation that I've just offered, we are more compenetrated with experience. There's less of a barrier with experiencing things directly, and at the same time, that same ability makes it so that indirectly experiencing things, we are less taken by them, emotionally speaking. Because, see, when we are in a push-pull, emotionality-based relationship with the world, with reality, because we know it can take us off our center and we can feel distressed or annoyed or angry or whatever, then there is much more of a tendency to keep a veil of distance. So as we forgive memories, forgive trespasses, both our own and those of others or life itself, the need to keep that distance starts to dissolve. We start to see through the fabric of experience much more clearly. Yeah, so that forgiveness allows clarity, allows us to touch experience and clarify it much more. It's an upward spiral that we're talking about here. And the rendering of the world starts to become much more cinematographic in nature, much more fluid, much more clear, but it loses its heaviness, that sting, what we call reality, often has that heavy solidity to it, and that starts to become more open, free, and fluid. Now, I can't speak to this next part from experience, but listening to some people online who have gone beyond unity consciousness and onto full no self, and also some of the masters, eventually the mind indeed stops rendering the world altogether. It becomes completely superfluous, a completely superfluous endeavor, and the mind is a very efficient machine. It doesn't do anything it doesn't have to. So just like throughout this entire talk, you were not thinking about the sense of achievement that you felt when you tied your shoelaces for the first time, or the sense of dread that you felt the first time you had to ride your bicycles without the little training wheels, because you've digested those experiences. In the same way, there comes a point where every experience has been digested completely. There's no need to keep it in mind, and there is no need to continuously render a world based on that memory that was cemented by an emotional kind of imprint that keeps it very, very latent and ready to be pulled whenever we are encountering situations that remind us of this or that, which is what renders the world in the first place. So this is a very long-winded and potentially convoluted way to explain how the more we forgive, the less emotionally imprinted our memories become, and therefore we evoke them less in the way that we interact with our sensory perceptions. That makes our sensory perceptions more clear, more transparent, and they start to acquire an unreality, a cinematographic unreality to them, which makes us able to contact them more directly, and at the same time in a less heavy and emotionally charged type of way, up until the point where the world eventually dissolves. Though, as I said, I cannot vouch for that last part, although I have gone into fairly deep non-dual spaces. What I understand is that the no self is an entirely different thing altogether, right? Like just as the full-on non-duality is a very big jump compared to our pedestrian daily normal, what would you call it, civilian consciousness, the no self is an equally big jump. So I can't speak to that topic at the moment. And yet I think that there is something to be said indeed about the value of forgiveness in helping us clarify the world in a way that helps us to interact with it in a much more wholesome way. It's interesting to notice that this is an exercise that needs to be done by indeed working on our emotions and on our pain bodies, on our shadow, doing shadow work and so on. Because it does very little for me to explain that the world is not real. We've heard many Advaita Vedanta speakers say the world isn't real, but the mind makes it real when it believes that its survival depends on that being the case, right? So I better take the world seriously, else I die. So the mind will continue to make it real so long as we have not processed and digested many things, many very deep-seated hang-ups that our human mind comes programmed with, or which are acquired through the course of our lives. I had another thought in the back of my mind about this topic. Let's see if it comes while I keep elaborating. So, yes. So I could explain this, but it does very little unless the shadow work is done, because the mind will reify. It will make things apparently real for safety's sake. And just like when you're watching a movie that is very compelling or listening to a very compelling piece of music, you may find yourself breaking into tears. Now you know that you're watching a movie, and yet there's still something that still has bite for you. It still grabs you, right? The plot might be so well weaved together. The cast and the cinematography and the direction, everything is so on point. you cannot help but get lost in the story of the movie, even though you know you are in the back of your mind. You know you're sitting at a movie theater. Disbelief is suspended, and you get completely caught by it. So this is a little bit back to basics in that sense, right? The old movie analogy of mindfulness and so on. But it's still pretty relevant at whatever level we are in our development. Now, in essence, then, what we are saying here is that forgiveness is an excellent tool for approaching shadow work, for essentially increasing our capacity to not look away or wish that things were otherwise, but to forgive things as they are, to forgive ourselves as we are, which might be even more difficult, right? And it doesn't mean that we need to like things. It doesn't mean that we preclude the potential for improvement in the future. It just simply means that whether we figure out things or not, whether we manage to transform ourselves or not, whether we manage to solve that problem in the future or not, whether we turn that corner or not, for better or worse, things at this present moment, in this instant, are the way they are. And we're not going to look away or negotiate with that, because they already are the way they are, right? So we allow that to be the case. We forgive the now, and we forgive ourselves in that now. And if we can't forgive the now, then we forgive ourselves for our incapacity to forgive the now. But there has to be a point where the buck stops and we just go, okay, fine. This is just what it is right now. So I'll settle into that, and then we see where we go from there. And that, interestingly enough, starts to erode the mind's tendencies to use emotion to hijack our sense of reality and to keep us in a kind of permanent state of hypnosis, memory-based hypnosis that is driven by essentially fear and desire. That is the essence of today's video, and I am actually very curious to hear what you guys make of this one, if you can relate to the topic, and if you think that these videos and this channel is worth liking, sharing, and subscribing, then I invite you to do so, and I'll be back with more videos pretty soon. Thanks for listening. Cheerio, and bye-bye.